All right. Friday feelings from the countdown. I hope I can deliver. So, week 37 has passed. Time flies. I will be checking the chat in YouTube as usual, so please post there if there is some trouble with the stream or you can't hear me or something like that. I guess most of you have posted the first workshop for peer review and are busy peer reviewing, or at least looking forward to peer reviewing, and that is the first thing we will talk a little bit about today. So let's switch off the presentation and talk a little bit about peer review. So you find the peer review system using the same link you submitted with, so that should not be a problem, and I guess most of you have found your way into the system already. And you cannot upload your file anymore, and you cannot update it because we're now in the peer review phase, the review phase of this workshop. So you simply click on review, and I haven't started any reviews yet, so I will start my first review here. All right. I can then download the file that I'm supposed to review. I won't do that right now because it will take too long and be messy. But then you get to the review itself. So you look at the material you got, try to understand it, and then you focus on clarity first. So you look at the language, spelling and grammar, notation and layout. We should use the correct UML notation, that is boxes. It should be readable. We should have an okay layout. That can be hard to achieve in some models, but try to do your best there. We should follow the rules of thumb when we name a class. It is probably a noun. We use the singular form. We use some kind of verb phrase for an association, typically at least. And you give your comments. here the focus is that you should try to find some ways that your fellow student can improve clarity. Maybe use a spell checker or something like that. Yeah, and the first question, and I saw this one also in Slack, is that should you give your solution? I would prefer if you did not do that. Maybe you can give an example about what you mean if you have trouble explaining it in the text. So, for example, you could write, make sure to use the singular form if there are a lot of plural forms in the diagram, for example. So you are not supposed to give the solution, but rather point your fellow student in the correct direction. Then we review completeness. And we do the same thing there. Was this even an attempt? Was it excellent? And then finally we review the content. And this is maybe the most thorough part, so to speak. Are there any unneeded classes in the model? So you need to look at the classes that exist, and are they supporting the requirements? Is there something that is extra that is actually not needed? And so on and so forth. And finally, you save the review. One important thing to notice here is that when you review the content, it is good to just not give your opinions, but also to reference from the literature, the course literature, or some other literature to back up your advice. So if you think that something is good or bad, then you should back that up with some other source of information than just your opinion. I would probably mention count vs counts. And another thing to note here is that the grades that you give the review do not in any way reflect on the final grade of this submission. So after all, this is for your learning experience, looking at models, reviewing models, and then also getting feedback from your models. So the grades you put down here are not in any way reflect the final grade of the submission. So you should be as honest as possible, and the recipient of the review will be able to improve until the final hand-in. Sure, you can give reading tips. This could be part of these the reference you give. So maybe you find some good section in the book, or you find a good section in the lecture. I would prefer it if you at least have one reference to some kind of literature. You should also note that I can make mistakes in lectures and so on and so forth also, because they are something that is done live and on the top of my head in some way. So there may be mistakes there, as there can be in any material. So it's always good to reference written materials in particular. There has been some questions in the Slack channel regarding, well, what if I get something that is for a higher grade here? Then I would just focus the review on the passing grade materials. So if there are stuff that you believe are for the higher grade, you can mention it and just say that I'm focusing this review on the passing grade materials, since this is supposed to be for the passing grade only. Yeah, the grade you give is only meant for the passing grade. So if you get a submission that has higher grade materials in them, you should just focus on the passing grade stuff. There may also be chances that you get some maybe an empty file or something like that. Then I would just mark this and complete the review with more or less uh, empty fields, and just say in the last review that this one was empty, and you can regard that as really not a review, and you should try to do at least two good reviews, of course. Yeah, the okay, so this system is actually not a custom system for this course. So there are parts that we will not use. For example, these teacher grades. So that it will not be used at all. What will be used is you will, in the last step, give feedback on the reviews you get. And if you give the worst grade on the feedback, I will check those reviews. So if you do a poor review, for example, just writing everything looks good and spend like 5 minutes, then there is a fair chance that I will ask you to do more thorough reviews for the next workshop. So the grading from the teachers is not something that we will use in the course. All right, any more questions regarding the peer review stuff? Uh, Make sure you try to work individually, so every individual should do at least 2 reviews. This means that if you work in a group, then with 3 people you should do at least 6 reviews, 2 per person, so to speak. So this is more of an individual step in the reviewing in the workshop. From what I collected, I think there are about 160 or something like that submissions, and this is pretty good. It's way more than usual, so we're, as I've said before, a large iteration of the course, and I hope everything will work smoothly for you. Can we change after we press a save? Oh, I don't think so. I'm not actually quite. I'm not super sure about that one. You can try it. All right. I think I will probably have to do this review so that a student does not have outstanding reviews. The goal is that every one of you should get at least 2 reviews as feedback, but there may be certain circumstances that make it hard for you to get 2, and if you're unlucky, you will only get 1, because someone may open a file for review and not complete it, and then things will could get a little bit messy in that sort. So if you feel like it's free to do more reviews if you want to. I think there have been students that have done like 7 reviews or 9 reviews because they like reviewing. All right, you can change the grades after you save it. Good. So we have a few days, or you have a few days to complete your reviews, and don't forget to do that. And then you will get feedback, and you can start improving on your workshop if you find the feedback worthy of an update. You download one file at a time. So, but you can totally do many reviews if you want to. So there is no limit on how many reviews you can do. But you need to finish a review before you move on to the next. All right. Oops. Not share, present. Maybe that's it for the peer review. I hope everything will work smoothly, as I said, and you will get used to this also, because for the second workshop there is of course more material to review also. So this is a little bit of a training session. Reviewing more files will not affect you in any case. There may be an interesting effect is that you will get more feedback on your reviews, and if you do 5 reviews, let's say, and you have 3 that are graded as really good reviews by your peers and 2 that are graded really bad, then you kind of like have made at least 2 good reviews, right? So in that case, it's maybe less of a risk doing more reviews in that sense. But you should of course do good reviews even if you just do 2 of them and not live on the edge there. So the past week has been quite filled with tutoring from my part. I don't know how many sessions I did, but there were quite a lot of sessions. So I've seen a lot of models, and I've seen a lot of good models, and I've seen a couple of mistakes that are quite common also. And I will talk about at least some of them today, so you can take this as something that it's quite a high likelihood that you will see these mistakes also in your the materials you review. So let's get a crack. And this is problems that I often see every year actually. So the first problem I see is that you have kind of like a mechanical modeling where you kind of like find every verb in the requirements and you make one association for every verb. In this case, we have 3 requirements related to a member and the member's boats. A member can register boats, a member can delete boats, and a member can change boats. So first, of course, you need to register some boats, and then a few weeks later you may update the information. Maybe you take a new photo, for example. How do you know that our review was done correctly? You will get feedback from your peer. So when you receive your feedback, then you grade this feedback. And I will take a look at those that are graded poorly. So one problem I see in this case is that I find models that look like this. I think every model that I've seen so far has had a member class and a boat class, and well, the boat club is primarily about the members and their boats, so this should probably not be that surprising. However, in this case, the model is just mechanically repeating the requirements and have one association for every of these use cases. For everything this member can do with the boat, we have one association. So a member can register many boats, a member can change many boats, a member can delete many boats. And this is a common mistake because, as you may remember, an association is put between 2 classes because we need to remember this relationship for some time. So in order for a member to delete a boat, we need to know that the member has, for example, registered the boat first. So we need to remember this connection between a member object and a boat object. But there is really no need, according to the current requirements at least, to know that a member has changed a boat. That he can change a boat is some other thing. But rather this being able to do so relies on that the member actually has registered the boat before. So we don't need extra associations for the change and the delete. Rather, the model should look something like this. The member probably owns a couple of boats, and a boat is owned by one and only one member. And this is enough for all of these requirements to be able to work. So because we know that a member owns these 5 boats, this member can, in a later stage, change the boats or delete them. So every verb is not an association. The associations are added because we need this connection to live on for some time. So we need to know that the member owns a number of boats because at some point later he or she would like to delete the boat or change the boat. The exact word here is maybe not super important. I would probably use register. That would be fine. I think owns is probably a little bit better because it says something more than just this registration. If you ask a member what kind of a relationship he has with his boats, it's probably owns. It's not that he registers them. So I think that's a better word, but it's not a super big deal. So this is a common mistake, and there are other examples where you just add an association because someone can do something. So you need to think, is this relationship something that we need to use at a later stage? So that is a common mistake, and I've seen this kind of stuff in multiple submissions during the tutoring sessions. So don't do that. The next question, maybe I've not really seen this as much, but there is a tendency sometimes to add every actor as a conceptual class. And sure, an actor can be a conceptual class, but it's probably something you need to think more about. In the case of the boat club, the member is an actor, and it's most likely also a conceptual class because we need to handle the members. We need to remember which member owns which boats and so on and so forth. So this I'm not really sure about that question there that I got, what is meant. But yes, this is a use case diagram. It shows who does what in the system, the actors and some of the features of the actors. And then we have the domain model at the side that supports these requirements. So for these requirements here to work, the domain model should probably look something like this. So the member is both an actor and a conceptual class, and this is the reason for that is that we need to remember the boats for the members. We probably need to remember the fees for the members, and so on and so forth. So for the other actors, the secretary and the treasurer, you should ask yourself the same question. Is there something we need to remember about this actor? Is there something in the requirements that points us into this direction that, okay, we need to remember that this actor has done something, or we need to remember some information about this actor? All right, an interesting question there about the multiplicities. Yeah, I think you can have maybe the most interesting part is this many zero or many relationship. In this case, I think it would be a good idea if you could be a member without actually owning a boat. So it would be a little bit sad if we have someone that applied for membership uh, that did not have a boat, and then we said no, we cannot really accommodate you. You need to get a boat first. There could be supporting members, people that have sold all their boats. What happens if I delete my last boat? Do I get kicked out and stuff like that? So I think it's probably easier and better to have this zero or many boats. But maybe you are an exclusive boat club, so you need to have at least 5 boats to join. It's more or less up to you to decide that. And also this one here means that a boat is always owned by one member, so we don't have any loose boats, so to speak, any ownerless less boats in the system, and also we don't have any boat sharing here. So a boat cannot be owned by several members. I'm guessing that in reality the members in some cases actually own boats together. I know a couple of people that actually do that in reality. But to make the system a little bit simpler, we could issue a rule that, well, one person is the owner, or one member is the owner in the system of the boat, and if you are sharing the boat, you need to handle that separately on your own, so to speak. Indeed, this is maybe not super clear in the requirements, and that's the whole purpose of domain modeling, that you find things in the model that you decide on, or at least have questions about, and then you go back to the domain expert, the members or the secretary, and you ask them. In this case, you need to make up your mind, more or less. But this one I wouldn't be too hesitant about. It's for me this seems quite natural to have it like this, so to assume that you don't need to own a boat, and we can assume that we only have one owner for each boat. Reasonable assumptions. But as I said, if you would like to make the boat club super exclusive, you could say that, well, you need to own 5 boats, or you're not welcome in our club. Yeah, and we have this thing with the membership fee, that there is actually a fixed membership fee that's not that you always pay, even if you don't have any boats or berth, or how you interpret that. So there is maybe some indication that you should be able to be a member without owning any boats. But it's a good question, and as I said, when you do things like this, you cannot just assume that things are in this way, and you need to ask someone about it in reality. So if you're not really an expert in boat clubs and how they work yourself, then you need to go and ask someone that is, and ask how, okay, we can do it in this way, but we can also model it in another way, and that will give us certain effects. Alright, so every actor a conceptual class. Just as with the associations, you need to think about it. Yeah, we have kind of like the same problem with boats and berths. I think there, in that case, you need probably to think one step further also, because you have this requirement number 8, where there is some kind of a historical perspective on things. So you need to know, where was the boat placed last year, or maybe even longer back, to make a good suggestion for the placement. And this is actually something that I've prepared, because this is something that is often overlooked in these requirements, and they make the model more complicated, definitely more complicated. And I won't talk about the boat club anymore. You need to take a look at this, and I think this example is also in the lectures, so I've pointed a few people towards this example when doing the tutoring. And then you need to adapt this to the boat club and do a solution for it if you have not already done so. So the scenario is that we can have teachers, and we would like to know that a certain teacher has worked at a certain university. This is our requirement. We would like to know that a certain teacher, what universities has this teacher worked at? And this model is what we come up with. So a teacher can work at several universities. Now we are thinking a little bit over time here. So some time ago, a teacher worked at one university. A little bit later, he worked at another university, and we would like to get a list of that. And vice versa, university of course can employ several teachers. So looking at objects based on this class diagram. So this is a class diagram. Classes, as I mentioned before, is really not something that exists in reality. In reality, we have objects of certain classes. So in this case, we have the object Tobias that is of type teacher, and we have the object Daniel that is of type teacher. And then we have a couple of universities. We have BTH, we have LNU University, and we have KTH University. And using this association in the class diagram, we can link these objects. So Daniel is linked to BTH, and Daniel is also linked to LNU, and Tobias is linked to BTH, LNU, and KTH. And in this way, we have fulfilled this requirement that we had. So given a certain teacher, for example Tobias, we can just follow the links, the associations, and find the universities that Tobias has worked at. So BTH, LNU, and KTH. And the same thing for Daniel. We can find that he has worked at BTH and LNU. So far, so good. But maybe the requirement is a little bit more involved than this. Maybe we need to present a list in, for example, chronological order. So giving a teacher, we must know the order of employment. So which university did Tobias work at first? And then fill this list in chronological order, or some other more interesting requirement than that, but this will suffice for now. And this model right now cannot support this. In this model, we only have the links, and we don't really know anything about when a teacher worked at a university. So if we have this requirement of being able to know when the teacher worked at the university, we need to change our model. And maybe we come up with something like this. We find that it's common for an employer to have a contract. In this contract, we have, for example, a start date and an end date of this employment. There can, of course, be other interesting informations here also. For example, how much is this person paid? How much time should he work? What are the tasks, and so on and so forth. But I've kept it simple and just made this little model. And a teacher over time again can have several employment contracts, and a university has several employment contracts too, because several teachers are employed. And an employment contract is a link between one teacher to one university. So using this model, we can, this class diagram, this model, this domain model, we can create some objects. And now we have a little bit of a more complicated object diagram here. So we have the teacher Daniel again, and we have, for example, the BTH University. And Daniel and BTH are linked using employment contract number 4, it seems, with the start date 2016 to 2017. And Daniel also worked at LNU during 2017 and 2020. And also for Tobias, he worked at BTH 2016 to 2017 and at LNU 2017 to 2020 and at KTH 2010 to 2015. So we create these objects, the teachers, the universities, and we link them by using the employment contract objects. And now we suddenly have the data we need so that we can support the requirement of knowing the order of a certain teacher's employment at certain universities. So now we have a model that supports historical data, and we can find the teachers that has worked at certain universities and vice versa, and we know also when this working stuff was done. So this is basically what you want, but the solution here is not very elegant. For some there is kind of like some information missing here, or it's not that obvious to know that the teacher works at the university, because we have this a little bit weird link between the teacher and then to the employment contract and then to the university. So while basically this is working, we can do the modeling a little bit more elegant. Are history and time intervals the same thing? Otherwise, can you give a short example of a time interval? Well, yes. A time interval can, of course, be used to define a point in history. So instead of having two dates in this example, the start date and the end date, I could define a time interval class and use that one. And a time interval then would be a start date and an end date. So basically to model history, you need some form of concept of time, and this can be a time interval. In special domains, for example, maybe if you're a teacher, you will always it's mandatory to work at a university. Then we probably would not need an end date in the employment contract. Then we would just need a start date, and you work in the same place until you have a start date in some other employment contract at another university. In this case, actually, I think there you can have a gap year, so to speak, because this one ends in 2015 and this one starts in 2016. So there's a gap year here, and thank God there is. But maybe you have a special domain where you can make this a little bit simpler or something like that. So problem solved, but not an elegant model, because in the first case it was pretty clear that a teacher worked at the university. This association is actually quite nice, but we needed something else to latch on to this association, so to speak. So there are two options. Right now I know the diagram is not that nice, but we could keep this association works at. But we can notice that it is a derived association. So this association does not really exist. It's just something that we use to explain the model a little bit better. The association is really found looking at the teacher and the employment contract and the employment contract and the university. And then we can put a slash in front of this association to show that it is this derived association. Sure, you can reference the stream if you want to. And this concepts of derived associations is quite nice. I think it works quite well. We have this nice association still, but we know that this association is just something that we use as an explanatory link between the teacher and the university to clearly show that this is what we mean by this in this model. There, you can also have derived attributes, actually, something that is actually calculated more or less by using information that is known in some other area, but it can be nice to show it. I think the example in the book is a receipt class that has a sum as a derived attribute, because you can calculate the sum by looking at the line items that are present in the receipt and looking at the price for every item there and calculating this sum. An even more elegant solution, I think, is using this. So this is the derived association, is using an association class. And in this case, you basically keep the association as it is, and you latch on this association class that can add attributes to the association itself. So here you would add the date and so on and so forth. Of course, for the employment contract, I kept that out just to keep it a little bit simpler in the image. Yes, the example you mentioned from the book, likewise, a cashier may look up product descriptions, but there is no need to remember the fact of a particular cashier looking up particular product descriptions. That is something you can definitely think about when thinking about the list and the show calendar event requirement. Is there a need to remember that the list has been shown or that the calendar event has been shown or not? Good point. So I think this association class is really elegant, and it works just as the derived associations really in this example, and both of them give rise to this type of object diagram. So they all fulfill the requirement, but they show this link between the teacher and the university a little bit more clearly. One thing to note, I think, is that if you use a derived association, there is a fair chance that it can be a little bit tricky to jump around among the classes and try to derive the association. So I would recommend that you do a little note about this if you use a derived association. How is this association really derived? Especially when showing your model to someone new, it can be tricky for this new person to understand how the association is actually derived, and that new person can be yourself in a couple of weeks. So you tend to forget things quite easily. This also points to one interesting thing I think is that if you create these object diagrams, or if you create objects and fill them with concrete data and use that as an example of okay, I have this class diagram. Now using this class diagram I can create objects like this, and I can link them together as this, and then you just test drive your requirements. So for example, I would like to know which teachers worked at what university during 2016. You would have a bunch of employment contracts, and you can just look, okay, this is a valid contract. That one I should keep, not this one. This one I should keep, and that's it. So in this query, so to speak, into the model, I would return Daniel and BTH and Tobias and BTH. So we have 2 teachers that worked at BTH University during 2016. So this is a little bit of a game you can play with your domain model. So create some objects, link them together as a snapshot of how the system would look if certain things has happened, and then you check the requirements. I would like to get this. I would like to get all of the boats of a member. I would like to get all of Tobias's boats. And then you can see, do I have links to these boats? Yes, I do. The model supported this requirement. So I think that's an interesting use of object diagrams and objects in general to create an object diagram based on your class diagram, check if the requirements actually can be fulfilled using the objects. Is the data there? Are the links there correct? Could maybe be an interesting game for someone to develop in their thesis work in the 3rd year. So I think that this was one of the these 2 mistakes are, or 3 mistakes are maybe the most common ones that I've seen so far. You have a tendency to add every verb as an association. You have a tendency to add every actor as a conceptual class, and you need to think about how to handle history of boats and births in your case. So maybe a few of you are moving into workshop number 2 soon, at least. I could recommend it if you're feeling a little bit insecure in the programming. Then it could be a good idea to start looking at workshop number 2. And some questions have come to me, and maybe the most common question in the first few days is, how are workshop number 1 and workshop number 2 connected? Well, they are conceptually connected. So you have a domain model, and you can use that as an inspiration for the design you create. I would probably be surprised if you do not have a member class, for example, in your design for workshop number 2. Then again, the requirements for workshop number 1 actually have nothing to do with the requirements for workshop number 2. Workshop number 2 has quite a lot of simpler requirements. They are more down to being a requirement specification, so to speak. The idea is not to have any loose ends or assumptions there. So you should just take a look at the requirements for workshop number 2 and forget a little bit about the requirements for workshop number 1. But you can use the domain model as an inspiration. And this is, of course, because workshop number 2 is about design and implementation of a design, and not about analyzing requirements and having unstable requirements and things like this. So keep it simple and focused on the requirements that are listed under workshop number 2, and do not mix in the workshop requirements for workshop number 1. That is the idea. And in general, I think you should keep workshop number 2 as simple as possible. Sometimes I get questions about exotic frameworks and things that you can do in special languages and things like that. I would not recommend doing that. Frameworks are prohibited in the workshop. I want you to code as much as possible. The implementation part is really not that advanced, so it doesn't really require anything other than plain vanilla Java or plain vanilla C# stuff, or the vanilla of your language of preference. So keep it simple, keep it focused on designing and coding your own classes there. So we have a question. Are we supposed to create class diagram based on the workshop 2 requirements, then start working on our implementation based on our diagram? Well, I don't really care how, in what order you do things. So there is this notion of doing upfront design and then implementation and then you're done. I think that is probably not something that is really realistic for any system that is large enough, so to say. I think you should do a little bit of a design and then do some implementation, and then look at the implementation, update the design, and then you design a little bit more, and then you code a little bit more. Then you look at the code you have and you update your diagram, and then you iterate like this until you're done. In some cases I code first and I do design when I think I run into a situation that I cannot really understand by just looking at the code. Sometimes I do design first and design a little bit before I start coding, just to have a general notion on how I would like to have things. So if you feel comfortable with coding, you should worry that much for workshop number 2. It's hard to say. I think you don't code everything and then do a class diagram. I think doing a little bit of coding first, then maybe, and then doing a class diagram should be beneficial. So you have to mix the two activities that you do here. But in what order you do that, I don't really care about that. The end result, however, should be that the code and the diagrams match, of course. So you always need to look at your code and then look at the design and find out if they match. And this will probably be one of the focus crash courses that I will release next week. Just this mechanical translation of diagram into code and vice versa. So that will probably take 5 to 10 minutes to explain, and I will do that in Java, I think, because that's easiest for me. So as you gain experience, you probably do more design work in your head as you code. But an important thing is to notice that you always do design work, even if you don't do a diagram on paper, or maybe the diagram is just a few boxes with lines between them. That is also doing design to some degree. Also, the aspect of communication of a solution, of a design, becomes more important, of course, the more people you are. If you want things to work together in a smooth and seamless way, you have to agree to some degree on how things are to be connected, and then you can leave the details in the implementation to the individual programmers. In the real world, you are able to grasp the entire, if you're able to grasp the entire program and code it freehand, then there is no point in doing the design model. Well, these examples are often quite being able to grasp an entire program that is somewhat complicated and of somewhat use, it's probably quite seldom you are faced with that task or that situation. And also, when you code freehand, you are doing design. You are doing design, but you're doing it in your head. So that is also something that I think you should remember, that just because you don't draw a diagram does not mean that you don't do design. The diagram is maybe something you use to be able to think more clearly, to be able to cope with problems when you cannot really grasp the entire program, or when you come into a project and you don't really understand how things are connected because you're coming into an existing code base. And that's also why you could have a design model documented at some level so that you can more easily get into the code base as a new programmer. But for this workshop, there is no way for me to actually know how you are working. I would recommend that you do a little bit of design and then you do a little bit of coding and you update your design looking at your code, what worked, what did not work, and then you iterate like that. All right, I think that is all that I kind of like prepared. There are some questions I think here in the Slack thread, if I can find it. Hey, here we go. All right, the first question, we should strive for a model view separation. Yes, you should not only strive for it, it's a hard requirement. But I would need something like an XML database, and that is not a member of any model or view. Is it okay to have a package called services and also have dependencies on the model from the services package? Hope it makes sense. I would probably put this services package inside the model. So problem solved. Persistence is often regarded as something that is a part of the model, at least some layer of the model or something like that. The loaded stuff, whether it be from a database, an XML file, or a JSON file, is something that will be transformed into the nice classes and objects that you use in the model. So I would put this services package in the model package, and whoops, then you don't have any problems anymore. All right, next question. Could you explain more about when things are best explained by use cases and should be maybe left out of the domain model? Well, the litmus test there is often that you should regard the requirements as requirements are good at showing what happens in certain situations. So the functionality of the system, maybe who can do what in the system, the dynamic parts. The dynamic parts, so to speak. And the domain model, as it's a static model, it can only show a static picture. It has no notion of time, so there is no selection or flow of things in the domain model. You cannot really show that very well, at least. Rules and stuff like that is best left to explain the details in the form of requirements, texts, and so on and so forth. Domain model should focus on the information that is needed and the connection between these information blocks so that we can fulfill the requirements. Also try to clarify what constitutes thinking in terms of software developers. I'm not really sure about that question, what it means. I think if I just elaborate freely, so a problem that or a frustration I often come across with domain modeling from students and from developers in general is that it is seen as something that is hard and tricky and a little bit fluffy, so to speak. And the design part is probably more likable by developers because it has a concrete coupling to the actual implementation. So many are frustrated by the fluffiness of domain modeling and just having it as a tool to analyze the requirements and as an inspiration for the design. Maybe that is what you're after. Alright, the link is shared. In general, when we call a domain model a big one or a small one? Yeah, oh, really hard question. When should we stop adding more details and think that more than this might not be required? It's just make things more complicated. Yeah, I think personally, I think you should strive for as small a model as possible, but not too small. The litmus test is, of course, that the model should explain the we should support the requirements. So we cannot go any smaller than that, right? We need to support the requirements and make sure that the requirements can be executed, so to speak, using the domain model information. Then you may add additional things also to make the model more clear, and maybe this the example with the teacher and university thing there is, well, we added something, but we then thought that maybe the model isn't that clear, and we added this works at association back in some way. So there can be a competing qualities of having a small model and having an understandable model also. But then again, adding things makes things more complicated the more things you add. So I think start by supporting the requirements and then add things if you feel that they are adding more to the understandability of the domain model. Okay, so the clarification was, how do we know when we are messing up domain by software concepts? Yeah, okay. Typically you find things named by in a software-ish kind of a way. Sometimes I see system, for example, in the domain model, boat system or something like that, or yeah, things like this. So when you add things that have software names, so to speak, that is often a thing that you then you are thinking a little bit about software and not about the actual domain. Then again, maybe you are doing a domain model over a software concepts, and then of course you will add software concepts to your domain. But in the case of the membership, the boat club, boat clubs, they handle members and they handle boats and memberships, maybe membership fees, the births and so on and so forth. There are no databases, for example. Member database would be a typical software concept. Okay, which lecture should we take a look at before starting on workshop 2? There are reading instructions on the course homepage for that. Should we write unit tests to the code we implement in workshop 2? Of course you should. Unit tests and testing is always a good idea, but it's not a requirement for the course. So if you're comfortable in writing unit tests, please do. If you're not, you need to handle your testing in some other way. And sadly, unit tests are probably not enough to have a good confidence that your application works. So you will probably need to do some manual testing also. What if you have a very established concept in a domain model such as calendar? Does it need to be modeled, or can you simply include a conceptual class calendar to note that the customer needs it? Hard question to answer. I think I think it could be if we're talking again about the boat club and the a small connection between them. All right. I should probably mute my desktop audio. Reconnection successful. Maybe there was some issue there. Would it be correct to think that a domain model shows what information is needed to implement the requirements when you begin coding? To some degree. When you implement, you will have lots of other things also to think about. For example, okay, we need to save the members and the boats in some way, and that will add things that are probably not present in the domain model, and we need to present a user interface, and that can be something that is really, really complicated and adds a lot of complexity. For example, if you have a graphical user interface, it's not uncommon that 40 to 50% of the code is actually just user interface code. And that's often a pretty large part of the actual code base, so to speak. So yes, the domain model will provide a base maybe, but there will be other things added also. All right. Time flies, as I said, an hour has passed. I hope you have enjoyed, and next week I think there will be a little bit less tutoring. I think it will be mostly doing your peer reviews and stuff like that. So we will be a little bit conservative next week, I think, with the tutoring times, and then we will add more tutoring, focus the tutoring when you're updating your submissions for the final submissions. So I hope you will have a super weekend, and I will, yeah, thank you. I think this is quite a nice little informal way also of summarizing the week and talking a little bit about the problems and things that come up. So I enjoy this also. Have a great weekend, guys, and see you next week. Bye bye.